Hi, everyone. This is Anne-Marie Gaddy from Classic Movie Hub. I'm so happy to be hosting the second event in the Screen Classics discussion series from Classic Movie Hub and the University Press of Kentucky with co-host Citizen Screen. Tonight's event is Mean, Moody, Magnificent, Jane Russell and the Marketing of a Hollywood Legend. And our guests tonight are authors Christina Rice and Andrew Erish. I'm here with Aurora from Citizen Screen, who will tell us a little bit more about tonight.
Yeah, hi, Anne-Marie. I'm really excited to be here. Let me start by saying I read Christina's biography of Jane Russell. It is fantastic, impeccably researched. Russell was such a fascinating woman with many, many sides to her. And also a fascinating movie star. So I can't imagine anyone not loving this book. The backstories are wonderful. So it's really, really a lot of fun. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Christina. She is a librarian and photo archivist for the Los Angeles Public Library. She's the author of Anne Dvorak, Hollywood's Forgotten Rebel, which I haven't read yet, but I cannot wait to read. And of course, the book we're featuring tonight, Jane Russell, Mean, Moody, Magnificent, Jane Russell and the Marketing of a Hollywood Legend. Here to discuss the book with Christina is Andrew Erish, the author of Colonel William N. Seelig, The Man Who Invented Hollywood, and the brand new Vitagraph, America's first great motion picture studio. I cannot wait to get my hands on that one either.
Great. Thanks so much, Aurora. Before we start, and again, two fabulous books. The Jane Russell book, tremendous. Vitagraph, I actually started a couple days ago. So we're very excited at Classic Movie Hub to be able to have these two very special authors with us. Before we start, I just want to add that I am very happy to say that tonight is a live Facebook chat, so we will be taking questions via the chat, via the comments. So please feel free. Please feel free to comment along, to add some questions, and we'll wait till the end of the discussion, and then we'll look at the comments and answer some questions. So please join me in welcoming Christina Rice and Andrew Erish. Yay!
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Appreciate it. If you're a baby boomer like me, you probably can't remember a time when you didn't know who Jane Russell is. Her movies have never stopped playing on TV, and for more than a decade, she appeared in 24 commercials for the Playtex 18-hour Cross Your Heart bra. I'm sure we all remember those. Throughout the 60s and 70s, she was a frequent guest on TV variety and talk shows. And when you'd watch an interview with Jane, she always came across as earthy, no nonsense, very opinionated, but also someone who could laugh at herself. And I always find that an endearing quality. Her autobiography, which came out in 1985, is both refreshingly candid and painfully candid. So much so that if you've read it, you might ask yourself, what more could possibly be learned about Jane Russell? As Christina Rice shows us in her new biography, there's actually quite a lot, and it's very interesting. It's a great read. Christina, your first book was about Anne Dvorak, someone that we classic movie fans knew virtually nothing about outside of her work. It's quite a leap to write about Jane Russell. So I'm wondering, what made you choose her?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So yeah, as you mentioned, my first book was about Anne. That was an utter passion project that I worked on for 15 years. So it was just this incredible odyssey, and blood, sweat, and tears were poured into that. So when it finally came out, I thought, cool, that's the book I have in me. I'm done. No way am I ever going to replicate that. And I don't think it would be possible to replicate that experience. But after a few months went by, as you know, having a book come out is really great. Having that finished product in your hand and knowing that you've hopefully contributed something valuable to film scholarship is so incredibly fulfilling. And I'm a research junkie. I'm a librarian. So, after I got over that, it's kind of like childbirth, you kind of forget about it after a while. You're like, oh, well, no, I think I could do this again. Maybe not 15 years, but maybe I could cut that in half. And so I started contemplating writing another book, and I didn't know who I wanted to write about, though, because so many of the stars that I love are very well documented, and I didn't necessarily want to retread. So I went to University Press of Kentucky to Patrick McGilligan, who works with them. And I said, I think I want to do another book. I don't know who to do. Maybe Aileen McMahon, because, I came across her when I was researching Anne, and he wrote back and said, we would love to see you write about somebody less obscure than Anne Dvorak, not more. How about Jane Russell? And that's not somebody I'd ever considered writing a book about. I was hyper aware of Jane from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. And I think her performance in that's probably one of my favorite performances. And I knew about The Outlaw. And, I knew about Playtex bras because as a kid, I remember her as the bra lady.
Yeah.
But I hadn't really considered it. And so once I started researching and finding out a little bit more about her, I realized that she certainly was interesting and was multifaceted. And unlike Anne Dvorak, who was not documented a whole lot, and where it was this odyssey of digging and having to fly across the world to find things, Jane Russell was hyper documented starting in 1941 and till the end of her life. And she always gave interviews, and she did have her own book. So I figured, you know what? Okay, I think I can spend a few years with Jane. And so I did.
That's great. One of the first things I was surprised to learn about in the book was that a photograph of Jane led to her first audition, which became her first film role. And Jane is so well known for her hourglass figure, but it wasn't a photo of her full body that got attention. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Jane got her start modeling for Tom Kelly, who was a Los Angeles photographer, and he was around for years. I think most people probably know him now for shooting the nude Marilyn Monroe photos that were on the Golden Dreams calendar and ultimately was the first centerfold of Playboy. But Jane started modeling for him. She never did nudes, but she always did actually pretty modest clothing modeling. And, he would have photos hanging up on the wall of his studios, and he had a very tightly framed close-up of her face where she's almost kind of snarling, which you can picture Jane doing. And that was hanging up in the studio. And there was an agent named Levis Green who would, periodically stop by Tom Kelly's studio just to see if there were any interesting faces that he might be able to, pass along to a studio. And at the time, Howard Hughes and Howard Hawks were looking for somebody to play the role of Rio in The Outlaw. And they were looking for a brunette because the character was supposed to be half Mexican. And he saw this snarling photo of Jane and said, "Who is this?" And Tom Kelly said, "She's a nice girl, so she doesn't need to be messed up with with the likes of you." And when Kelly wasn't looking, he took the photo and showed it to Howard Hughes and Howard Hawks. And as they say, the rest is history. But yeah, it was, Howard Hughes, as many of us know, would come to be rather obsessed with Jane's physique. But yes, it was a photo of her gorgeous snarling face that caught his attention.
Along those same lines, I know that you quote in your book, when Jane wrote her autobiography, she wanted a portrait of herself on the cover, something classy. And the publisher insisted on one of the exploitation photos of Jane reclining in a haystack that were made for The Outlaw. And Jane didn't like it, but she went along with it. And I think you and University Press of Kentucky are making Jane very happy because you put a very classy portrait of her on the cover of that book. It's a great looking picture of her.
Thank you. You know,
So,
and that was very deliberate. When I first started working on the book, and I started working on it like early 2016, and initially I thought, well, of course I'm going to put one of those George Hurrell haystack photos on the cover. Like,
right.
why wouldn't I? Of course I am. And as I started researching her, and as I started understanding, you know, the complex, conflicted relationship we had with her publicity, as well as those photos, you know, specifically, I think by the end of her life, she would get asked about them and just roll her eyes, you know, because if you think, you know, these photos you take when you're that young, and how many years later you're still being, these things have just chased you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ultimately felt, you know, and I don't know if Jane would have been thrilled that somebody was writing a book on her. I think she probably felt she wrote her book. Who the hell cares after that? So yeah, so I did select a photo. I sent a few to Kentucky, but they were all kind of along those same lines. And I did want to do something that would honor her rather
Yeah.
than do something that would have irritated, because I think she would have been irritated enough that I wrote a book on her.
Right.
So I thought at least I could put just a great photo of her from Macau on the cover. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you for
Yeah.
noticing
Oh,
that. It was
yeah.
very deliberate.
Absolutely. Um, you know, one of the first moments that Jane was in front of a camera for her first movie, The Outlaw, I guess was on location in Arizona, and Howard Hughes sent a large contingent of photographers. And from the very get-go, the publicist was selling her as a big sex bomb. And there was an incident that took place that was probably her worst, biggest nightmare she ever had on location, but she turned that around. And it kind of set her course for who she was, uh, her relationship with the movies from that point forward. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so you know, she was essentially discovered by Howard Hawks, who was the original director of The Outlaw, and Hawks was the one who conducted the screen tests. And so he was the one that selected her, and then Howard Hughes eventually became so enamored with her that, you know, he held on to her for years and years. So they did go on location, you know, the whole crew. She didn't actually appear before the cameras on location in Arizona. So
Oh, okay.
some of that foot, so how, you know, it's the earliest shots of the movie, and it's really easy to tell which ones are on location versus which ones are, you know, on the sound stage. I think it's also pretty easy to tell which scenes were directed by Howard Hawks and which
Yeah.
ones were directed by
Yeah.
painfully obvious.
Definitely. Definitely.
But Jane was still there, but no, so Hawks actually never directed any of her scenes. And so I
Okay.
will say the scene where she first encounters Billy the Kid on the haystack and they're wrestling, that was the scene that had been filmed for the screen test. So
Oh,
she did
okay.
use Hawks's influence for that scene. And I think it's a great scene in the movie, even though Hawks didn't direct it. So, but she was on location and they had to do something with her. So yeah, Russell Birdwell, who had been hired to do publicity on the film, and he was behind the search for Scarlett, for Gone with the Wind, and just really a legendary publicist. Yes, sent all of these photographers to, you know, capture Jane at her God-given natural best, you might say. And, you know, and she said later on, she was so naive. So when they're asking her to bend over and pick up buckets of water or bend over with an axe, or she just did it, not knowing kind of where that lens was going. And so one night she was in a tent. They had kind of those semi-permanent platform tents because it was in such a remote location. And Jean Lester, the photographer, you know, knocked on her door. Hey, Janie, can I get some photos of you? And she had her put on like a negligee and pose, like leaning over and brushing her teeth, or kind of, you know, leaning in the doorway. And she felt kind of gross about it. And he finally asked her to jump up and down on her bed, which she did. You know, and you look at the photo and she's, you know, I mean, she's this kid who was signed to a movie contract and she's doing what she was told because she thinks that's what she's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And she jumped up and down on the bed and she's smiling in the photo. And after he left, she broke down because she knew that crossed the line, and that was just kind of gross and it didn't make her feel good. And she went to Howard Hawks crying. And, you know, Howard Hawks was not the type to coddle. And he just said, if you don't want to do that, just say no. Like put your foot down. Like, don't make them do stuff you don't want to do. And having this director of Hawks's caliber tell her that, she took it to heart.
Yeah.
And so, from that point on, she would put her foot down, and when it came to Howard Hughes, I mean, it took her a long time to it would take a lot for her to put her foot down with the boss. But she would. And so
Yeah.
that was just this lesson she learned really early on. And, and I do think, unlike a lot of other actresses, of that studio system, I don't think the studio system didn't eat Jane up and spit her out, because she didn't allow that to happen.
Right. She set up boundaries, and she's very confident about herself.
Very confident.
Yeah.
Which I think protected her. So,
Yeah.
in many ways.
Yeah, that comes through loud
Yeah.
and clear. One of the ways I first discovered her was through the films with Bob Hope, Paleface and Son of Paleface, which I think are a riot. And I recommend those films, especially Son of Paleface. I think it's up there with Godfather 2 as one of the great sequels that might actually be better than the original. That's how crazy I am. But eventually, Howard Hughes bought RKO. There was someone under contract to RKO, the king of the RKO lot. Jane became the queen of the lot, and they were inevitably paired together. Do you want to talk about them and that chemistry?
Oh yeah. So, Robert Mitchum, who was under contract to RKO, and he had his marijuana bust, which would have killed a lot of careers. And, Howard Hughes, you can say what you want about him. He knew publicity when he saw it, and he saw Mitchum's bust as publicity. And so he rushed his films out and, hired Jerry Geisler, the lawyer, who, was able to reduce the charges, and Mitchum survived that. And so absolutely, it was only a matter of time before the two of them would be paired up. They only made 2 movies together, which I think is really a bummer. So they did His Kind of Woman and Macau. I think they were back to back, and the two of them became fast friends. They were friends until Mitchum passed away, decades later. And on screen, oh my gosh, that chemistry on screen is amazing.
It sure is.
Her introductory scene in His Kind of Woman, it's one of my favorite Jane scenes, and she's singing 5 Little Miles from San Bernardino, and it's just a great introduction for her character. But the look on Mitchum's face when he first sees her, my God, chemistry just off the charts between the two of them. They're so much fun to watch together. Yeah.
What did Jane say when someone asked her, what do you attribute that on-screen chemistry to?
Yeah, she thought for a second and said, it just looked like we deserved each other.
That's so classic. I mean, and she's right. She's absolutely right. Well, the other big film, and you've mentioned it before, is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And, Jane and Marilyn Monroe are the 2 biggest American sex symbols of the 1950s. So it's inevitable that they would make a movie together too. And they formed a real friendship, I gather, from reading the book. And Jane was very protective of Marilyn. And I think that sense of Jane being comfortable with who Jane was is very different from how Marilyn felt about herself. And I think maybe there's a big sister, little sister thing going on. But Jane tried to share as much of her life with Marilyn as she could. And that led to an interesting place, I think. If you know where I'm going with this question.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is that Jane had a lot of confidence, which she did, and she had a very stable, supportive, loving upbringing. Her father unfortunately passed away when she was 16, but her mother was an absolute rock of the household. She had 4 younger brothers who she helped raise, and they never let her take herself too seriously as an actress. When she got her contract with Howard Hughes, she came home and they all said, "Oh, you're such a big movie star." So, she never took herself seriously. She always had that support system. She maintained friends from Van Nuys High School. so, I think she always had people who genuinely had her best interests in mind, again, whereas Marilyn was the opposite. She had just so much instability growing up. And I think
Yeah.
as she skyrocketed the way she did, I think she often had people whispering in her ear who, may or may not have had her best interest in mind. And I think, had their own self-interest. And so, I think one of the things I do love so much about Jane is because she had that self-confidence, she wasn't threatened by other people, and she wasn't threatened by other women.
Yeah.
Which I think so often women are pitted against each other. And that just wasn't the case with Jane. She always had very strong friendships with women. She always wanted to see other women succeed. So, she's on this movie with Marilyn, and Jane's thrilled. This is over a decade after Howard Hawks leaves The Outlaw. She's finally getting a chance to work with Howard Hawks. It is a big budget, big studio, Technicolor musical. Like, this is just a chance of a lifetime. So she wanted it to work. So, with Marilyn, Marilyn started being late to the set strictly because of nerves. And Jane would just go knock on her door in the morning and say, "Come on, Blonde, let's go. Time to get," she wasn't the type to be like, "No, I'm going to be the last one on set." She would just go grab her. But Jane was very much aware. She could see Marilyn's insecurities. I think she knew about her instability growing up. And, Jane was an incredibly spiritual person, and, often tried to share that with other people. And so Jane had started this Hollywood Christian group where they would go to people's houses and do Bible study. And she thought Marilyn could use some of that. And so she did invite Marilyn over to the Hollywood Christian group one night, and Marilyn did go. Wasn't her cup of tea, but she did go. And so while the pair were working together, they got along, wonderfully, would occasionally stay in touch, after the film wrapped. And I think Jane thought about her often. They didn't form a long-term friendship. And as Jane said, Marilyn just didn't have long-term friendships.
Yeah.
But, I think Jane stayed in touch with her to the best of her ability and never had a bad word to say about her, just always sung her praises. And, and again, I think it's her best performance. I think it's Jane's best performance. And it's just an incredible, I think it is a gift from the universe that we have those two on screen together.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of Jane's faith, she was a woman of contradictions, and she was a very complex woman. And there was a time in her life in her late teens where she left the faith, and something really tragic happened. And the result of that, she came back into her faith and kind of saw what her real mission in life, that it wasn't being a movie star. Could you talk about that a little bit? We don't have a lot of time left for this segment, but.
Yeah. So, Jane, when she, in her late teens, like moved out of the house and was just kind of having fun like people that age do, she did end up getting pregnant. So it was an unwanted pregnancy, and it was in 1942. So it's kind of in the midst of this big push to promote her, and she's under contract. So, she did have an abortion, and this was a time period where safe abortions were not accessible to women. It did go horribly wrong. And because of that, one, she felt that it was because she had strayed from her faith, which is why she got in that kind of trouble. So from that point on, she was always very, very faith-based. And then she also was not able to have children. So she wasn't able to give birth from that point on. So, she did end up adopting. And, I don't think we have enough time to go into all of the issues she had with adopting and the international incident that the FBI got involved in. But there was an international incident that the FBI got involved with. And she was so discouraged and disgusted with the whole experience that she ended up starting a foundation, which became the fundraising arm for International Social Services, whose goal were to remove barriers to international adoption and to help facilitate international adoptions. And that was her foundation, WAIF, that she ran for like 4 decades. And I think something like 45,000 children were ultimately adopted because of the work that she did. And, I think she ultimately viewed her career as a movie star and her status as an internationally known figure was a way for her to be able to accomplish what she did with WAIF, which I think is one of the most interesting aspects of Jane's story.
Oh, absolutely. I just, my godson is adopted, and I'm just all for um, placing children in loving homes. And so many of the children that Waif helped to place were war orphans. Um, and she had toured different orphanages in different countries in Europe and saw um, what the conditions were like, and knew that there had to be other people like her that, you know, had a heart for kids that didn't have families. I just think it's one of the things that I think everyone might come away from the book just having the greatest respect for Jane.
Yeah, and
There's
that
there,
and that's what I hope, because
yeah,
she's not a perfect person,
no,
um, but she accomplished a lot, and it's kind of, for as much as she accomplished with WAIF, and she lobbied Congress and testified before Congress. I think it's an aspect of her story that's not as well known, and so
yeah,
I do hope that is the big takeaway from this, is that work that she did, because she really, it wasn't just like a movie star sticking her face on this thing
right,
for good press. It was
right.
something that she genuinely did, and she didn't care how much credit she personally got. She just wanted everybody to be aware of the mission and how they could contribute.
It comes through so loud and clear in the book. I just think it's a great accomplishment on your end to really put that in context and to put so much of her life in context, which was something that was missing from her autobiography. She kind of missed the bigger picture on a lot of contradictory facets of her life. But how would you sum her up? Just briefly to give a little more flavor.
Yeah, Jane. Whew, I mean, I can kind of see, because when I first started working on the book, I was astounded that nobody had written a book about her.
Yeah.
As I researched her, I could kind of see why maybe some people would be turned off. She was that contradiction. I mean, on screen, she is larger than life. She is gorgeous. Like, she is, my God, that woman was a movie star.
Yeah.
She's kind of, like, what you see is what you get. And that's one of the things I love about her. As a biographer, she's a very reliable narrator, because she was so no nonsense and didn't want to put on airs. But for somebody who, advocated for children, her religious beliefs led her to at least verbally acknowledge social beliefs that maybe not everybody agrees with. So she's maddening. Like, she is maddening. And there are other people in my life who kind of do the same thing, where they say one thing but act another way, and you're like, how do you reconcile these two things? So as I put, I think in the preface to the book, Jane is devastatingly human, and she is very frustrating, but she is fascinating, and I think she's worth knowing about, and she's definitely worth watching on screen, because
Yeah.
she's a heck of a lot of fun to watch in her movies.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of your gifts as an author to not judge, to let Jane be Jane, and to allow the reader to make up their own mind about who this woman is. And I just wish more books were like that. Sometimes we fall in love with the people we write about, and our prejudice is to try to make them look good in spite of their warts or whatever, get in the way sometimes. And sometimes we turn against the people we're writing about. That colors things too. But I really appreciate just letting this woman be her. And I just wish more books were written that way. So congratulations. And I think it's time to turn this over to Anne Marie and Aurora and open it up to some questions as well.
Great. First of all, thank you so much, both. That was so interesting. I kind of wish you would go on.
Yeah, let me say that I had jotted down some questions for Christina, and Andrew, you touched upon all of them. I wanted to ask about Jane's deep faith, which, was so interesting, which, and her mother as well, who was such a huge influence in her life. I wanted to ask about really how she felt at the end of her career, let's say, about Howard Hughes having controlled so much of it. Really, I felt a little bit on a whim just because he controlled the marketing, as you go into so many great details. Do you want to touch upon that? How did she feel about the fact that Hughes really, had her career in his hands, literally?
I think it was a blessing and a curse. Because of him, she did become like instantly internationally known. But because of him, I don't know that she had the film career she could have. I mean, there's certainly incredible high points,
Right.
but I think she was probably capable of a lot more. So I think she felt the same way. She adored him. She was always incredibly loyal to him. Like, she would never say a bad word about Howard Hughes. He also drove her crazy, and she hated
Right.
so much of the publicity. Like, she hated she hated some of the things he wanted her to do, and even like in the case of the French line, like went on strike briefly just to battle him on that. But I think she also identified how key the publicity was, to her success. And
Right.
I think she, I think internally found peace with it because it did allow her to do the work that she did with Waif. So,
Right.
I think, later on, she would get interviewed, and there was an interview with her and they said, well, what were some of those taglines for the Outlaw? And she just rolled her eyes and said, I don't know, so I think,
Yeah.
she was always very conflicted. This is what I have to do, but oh my God, why did he have to do that? And why did he have to do that?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think she was very conflicted, but was always so loyal to him. And I
Right.
think that was one of the reasons why he always adored her. And as much as he like abused her in terms of the publicity and some of the things he wanted her to wear, he also took care of her. I mean,
He did, yeah.
she signed a 20-year contract. Well, she got paid $1,000 bucks for, for so long. So,
Yeah.
I think they adored each other and drove each other nuts all at the same time.
Right.
But
Right.
respected each other.
Well, it's a great read, honestly. I love the entire book, and her entire life, as you and Andrew were discussing, is fascinating. But I particularly was drawn to that because it is, this tug and pull sort of thing with them, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm a huge fan of the Paleface too, if I can say that. I really do love it.
It's great.
Yeah. So I'm seeing we do have, and this is funny because I have the same question, but it looks like we have a question from Karen who says, hi, Christina. I mainly know about Jane Russell from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and her film noir features. Outside of these, what Russell movies would you recommend? That was the exact same question I wanted to ask.
She did a movie called Foxfire with Jeff Chandler. I love this movie. I absolutely love it. I think it was the last movie to be filmed on 3-strip Technicolor. So it takes place like in this little it's like this dusty rundown mining town, but because it's Technicolor, it is gorgeous. So it's just a beautiful movie. It's kind of melodramatic, but I just think it's really interesting. So I highly recommend that. Of course, she made up, her big sweeping Western was The Tall Men with Clark Gable. And I think and I'm a huge Gable fan, and I think that the two of them just play off together so well. Even though there's a 20-year difference, he calls her grandma in the movie, and he ended up calling her grandma, in real life. But I just think it's just a very classic Western, and they're just wonderful together. The two with Mitchum, His Kind of Woman, and Macau are just so much fun. And of course, like the Paleface. She's, and it's funny because she makes The Outlaw, she makes Young Widow, like that is it from 1941 to 1948, and then she gets the Paleface.
Yeah,
I don't quite understand how that happened. And she's great in it. Like
she sure is.
Oh, she's just so spot on and just absolutely, she's a great straight woman for
Yes.
Bob Hope. So she's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
So.
and great in comedy. I also loved the little, and I apologize, I think it's Road to Bali.
Oh my God.
The little surprise ending. I mean,
Yeah.
It's fantastic. To me, it makes the whole movie just seeing her at the end there. So
Yeah, and I had forgotten about that. And I watched Ultra Valley, we watched it together recently, and I'm like, oh my God, Jane Russell.
Yeah.
So it was good that she could have that kind of, sense of humor about everything, great ending.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I do have one more question for you, though, because I know, Christina, I can't even imagine all of the research that went into this book, or how difficult it is to write a book. But was there anything that really surprised you when you were doing the research for the book?
Gosh, there's so many things about her that are surprising. I'll tell you, like, my favorite thing that I discovered. So she had this mid-century modern home, which is actually behind Aurora. She's sitting in that home. It was in Sherman Oaks, and it was designed by Kemper Nonlin Jr., who is one of the case study architects here in Los Angeles. And if you couldn't tell, like, I wrote a whole chapter on this house. I don't know if most authors would have done that, but yeah, I absolutely just fell in love with the house. And she really worked with him to design. She didn't just kind of say, okay, there's the plot of land on the hill, go for it. Like, she was hyper involved in it, and design was something she was really interested in and something she had contemplated at one time. And so that house was just truly a reflection of her. Unfortunately, it was torn down not too long after the Northridge earthquake in 1994, but that was something that I just had so much fun discovering, because I'm slightly obsessed with Los Angeles property research. So that's at the library. Anybody wants to research property, and they're like, oh God, give her to Christina, she'll just dive in. So that was one of my favorite things, was to just learn about the house. And now you all are, because I wrote a lot of words about that house.
Well, it was great to read too. And I actually love the way she looks in this picture, just, so relaxed and natural. I really liked it too. So I wanted to, if you don't mind, you did mention in the interview the book, and I hope people can see the cover, which is gorgeous. It really, sorry, it's kind of, oh, there it is.
There it is.
It's really, really beautiful. It's a beautiful picture of her. So congratulations. It's really a wonderful read.
Thank you. And it's almost out. It's going to be out on June 15th. And if you want to get a signed copy, I do encourage you to go to the Larry Edmunds website. So that's a bookstore hopefully everybody knows about here in Hollywood. But that is the place to get a signed copy, and I will personalize it. So I love steering people to Jeff over at Larry Edmunds. So if you go onto their website, you should be able to search it. And I encourage you to order a copy there, if you don't win one through the contest.
Yes. Oh, all right.
Okay. I think there's a couple more questions. Aurora, do you want to take the other one from Karen, and then I'll take that?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I don't
see it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm not able to access it. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a question here. Did she have a bigger business relationship with Playtex, or was it just a job?
I mean, I think it was just, it was mainly a job. I mean, she did work with them for over 10 years making those Playtex bra commercials. But I think she actually wore the bras and was and really did want to advocate for I think good support for full-figured women. And in the 80s, she actually did launch her own clothing line that was designed for, what we would now call plus size women. So I think she didn't make any business decisions with Playtex, but no, I mean, it was a product that she certainly got behind. And, and I think it does demonstrate how much of a sense of humor she had about herself. And during my research, I couldn't figure out whose idea having her be the Playtex spokesperson was. Whoever did that, you were brilliant. And the fact that she was willing to do it, I think just speaks volumes about how Jane thought about herself. And that was my introduction to her as a kid. And I think for a lot of people my age, and one of my favorite stories is she was doing a public appearance somewhere, and a little kid asked to take a picture with her. This was in the 80s. And she said, "Why would you want to take a picture with me? You don't know who I am." And he said, "Yeah, I do. You're the bra lady." So, she really was, that was just something she was very, very closely tied to during that period that those commercials were on, and they were on a lot.
I remember those commercials. We have another question here. Let's see, about the abortion being, abortion controversial in 1942. Was that made known to the public in her autobiography decades later?
Yeah, she does discuss it in her autobiography. And, you know, Jane, as Andy had mentioned at the top of the interview, she's very candid in her autobiography, like painfully so, which, you know, was nice for me as a biographer. But once she got it out there, she didn't want to talk about it again. So, you know, she included it in the book, but didn't really want to cover it after that. And when she was a guest on Joan Rivers' talk show, I think Joan Rivers was told, like, this is off, this is off limits. This is not something you're going to bring up. And Joan Rivers, being Joan Rivers, absolutely brought it up. And I think it's a painful thing to watch. Jane keeps it classy, you know, and just keeps her cool, but you can tell she's really uncomfortable with it. So yeah, so she absolutely, you know, did admit it and wrote about it, but wasn't something, you know, she wanted to certainly dwell on after she put it out there.
Mhm. Great.
Yeah, I think like anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I applaud her for doing it, you know, and, you know, as we discussed, you know, the repercussions of that, like, kind of led to her life's work, which was WAIF, you know, because had that not happened, you know, she probably wouldn't have been aware with the issues with adoption later on.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I see we're getting a lot of likes and loves. I'm watching the chat and all the little likes and loves are just going. That's been going on for the past 10 minutes. So I just wanted to let you guys know that. I appreciate that, everybody. I'm so glad everybody's here.
Yes.
So I just have one last question. I like to ask authors this, but a hard question. Favorite Jane Russell movie? Personal favorite Jane Russell movie? Is that
Gentlemen Prefer Blondes.
Yeah.
Hands down. I mean, look at this
Great
thing
movie.
that I got, you know, I caught auction fever last year, and that was the result, which I don't know, fortunate or unfortunate. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, I went on a cruise like 15 years ago and made sure that my room had a round window, just so when I walked into the room, I could go, oh, look, round windows. So hands down, you know, I think
That's great.
It was Jane's personal favorite, that and Fuzzy Pink Nightgown, you know. And Jane said that Dorothy Shaw was the closest that you'll ever get to really seeing Jane on screen. So
That's great.
I love Jane in all of her movies. I think she's a kick to watch, but Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is, it's
fantastic.
Beautiful movie. I mean, even the color, and when Russell and Monroe, my gosh, they're just stunning.
Yeah.
You know,
well, they're magic and both so good at comedy. I think they do not get the credit for how good they are at comedy. Their timing is impeccable.
I think it's one of the best buddy pictures ever made.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Great.
Can I just add, this is on a separate topic, but Christina, if you do decide in the future to do an Aileen McMahon book, you'll have an audience. So we have a comment. We did get a comment. If you still consider that in the future, we're here for you.
You know what? Somebody else is already working on it.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
I was kind of bummed. I mean, I'm happy somebody's doing it. I'm kind of bummed. It won't be me, but okay. No, I'm not the only one out there. So yeah, so Aileen will be out there.
Okay.
It's not from me. I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
Well, I really can't thank you all enough. I mean, Christina, my gosh, such a pleasure to have you here. Andrew, thank you so much. Personally, I found the interview so interesting. So thank you so much. I do want to mention, before I forget, that we're going to do something similar next month in another Facebook Live event in which Andrew will be interviewed about his book. About Vitagraph, so we really look forward to that. Robert Crane will be interviewing Andrew, and that's going to be an exciting event too. So I'm looking forward to that. And boy, I thank everyone for coming here tonight on the holiday weekend. Aurora, Christina, Andrew, and University Press of Kentucky, and everyone in our chat. Yeah. So I thank you all, and I hope you have.
This was great. This was really great. Thank you.
For me, so thank you so much.
Thank
really
you.
Appreciate your time, and I hope we get to talk again soon.
Yes.
All right. Great. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.